The cathedral had never held such a crowd. Every noble in the kingdom, every merchant with coin enough to bribe their way in, every commoner who could squeeze through the doors, all had come to witness the spectacle. Alpha King Lysander Hale's marriage to the scarred daughter of the ruined Vane family. The whispers started before dawn and hadn't stopped since, a vicious current of gossip that swirled through the ancient stone corridors like poisonous smoke. Hideously disfigured, they said. The fire that killed her mother left her unrecognizable. Poor creature. Hidden away for years because she's too monstrous to show in public. The king must be desperate for political stability to accept damaged goods as payment for debt. Lysander stood at the altar, 6'4" of controlled power wrapped in ceremonial black and silver, his dark hair pulled back to reveal a face that could have been carved from marble. Cold, beautiful, utterly unmoved. His amber eyes, the mark of his wolf, scanned the crowd with the detached interest of a predator observing prey. He'd built his reputation on being unshakable, the Alpha King who ruled with logic rather than emotion, who'd never taken a queen because he'd never found one worth the political complications. This arrangement suited him perfectly. A bride too damaged to refuse him, too grateful to make demands, someone who would fulfill the role of queen without cluttering his life with sentiment or expectation. The cathedral doors opened, and the crowd's murmur rose to a fever pitch. Elowyn Vane entered on her father's arm, Lord Vane, who looked half drunk even now, his face ruddy with shame and desperation. But no one was looking at him. Every eye fixed on the bride, wrapped in layer upon layer of heavy lace veil that completely obscured her face and form. The fabric was so thick, so concealing, it seemed designed not just for modesty but for mercy, hiding something the crowd was morbidly eager yet afraid to see. Lysander watched her approach with carefully maintained indifference. Her walk was hesitant, as if each step took courage. Perfect, timid and damaged, exactly as Lord Vane had promised. A queen in name only, someone who would stay in her corner of the palace and never complicate his rule. The political benefits of the marriage were undeniable. Settling the Vane family's catastrophic debt, demonstrating his willingness to show mercy to fallen nobles, and finally silencing the council members who insisted he needed an heir. All accomplished with a woman who would require nothing from him but basic courtesy. She reached the altar. Lord Vane practically shoved her forward before scurrying away, his duty done. Elowyn stood before Lysander, her face still completely hidden, her breathing audible even over the crowd's whispers. The priest began the ceremonial words, ancient and formal, but Lysander barely heard them. He was already planning his exit strategy for the wedding feast, calculating how quickly he could escape to his study and resume the work of actually running a kingdom. Then came the moment. The groom may unveil his bride. The cathedral fell absolutely silent. Thousands of people collectively held their breath, leaning forward with cruel anticipation. Would she be as monstrous as rumored? Would the king's face show disgust? Would this political marriage become the scandal of the century? Lysander reached for the veil with steady hands, prepared for disfigurement, braced for whatever nightmare Lord Vane's gambling debts had purchased. He was a warrior king. He'd seen battle horrors that would break lesser men. Whatever was beneath this veil, he could handle with dignity, and he lifted the lace, and the world stopped. Silver-white hair spilled free like moonlight given form, cascading over delicate shoulders in waves that caught the cathedral's stained glass light and transformed it into something ethereal. Her face gods. Her face was a study in otherworldly beauty. High cheekbones, full lips, and enormous eyes the color of storm clouds that met his with startling directness. Her skin was luminous, pale as winter snow, and yes, marked with scars, but these weren't the disfiguring burns the rumors had promised. These were intricate, delicate patterns that traced across her left cheekbone and down her neck like lace tattoos, like silver embroidery on silk. They didn't mar her beauty. They enhanced it, marking her as someone who'd survived fire and emerged transformed rather than destroyed. The crowd's collective gasp physically shook the stone walls. Somewhere, a woman shrieked. Noblemen stumbled backward. The whispers exploded into chaos. "That's not. She's beautiful. Lord Vane lied. Look at her." But Lysander couldn't look anywhere else. His carefully constructed indifference shattered like glass, and for the first time in years, he felt genuinely shocked. This wasn't what he'd bargained for. This wasn't the safe, uncomplicated arrangement he'd planned. This woman, this breathtaking, scar-marked woman, was looking at him with intelligence and defiance blazing in her eyes, and he realized with sudden, uncomfortable clarity that she'd been deceiving everyone, deliberately, for years. "Your Majesty," Elowyn said quietly, her voice steady despite the chaos erupting around them, And when she smiled, small, controlled, absolutely calculated, Lysander felt the ground shift beneath his feet. This wasn't a damaged bride grateful for rescue. This was someone who'd played the entire kingdom, including him. And as the priest stammered through the rest of the ceremony and Lysander mechanically repeated vows he'd thought would mean nothing, one question burned through his mind. What else is she hiding? 2 weeks earlier, Eowyn had been sitting in her father's study, reviewing financial documents by candlelight, when Lord Vane stumbled through the door reeking of whiskey and failure. She'd known immediately that something catastrophic had happened. Her father only drank this heavily when his gambling debts reached truly dangerous levels, and she'd spent the last 3 years carefully, secretly digging the Vane family out of the hole he kept making deeper. "We're finished," he slurred, collapsing into his chair like a puppet with cut strings. "Prison. Debtor's prison, within 5 days. The Crown's called in everything. Every single debt." Eowyn's blood went cold. "How much?" 200,000 gold marks, plus interest, plus penalties. Lord Vane laughed, a broken sound that made her skin crawl. "I've been meeting with the king's treasurer for weeks, begging for extensions. Finally made a deal today. Only way out." She knew. Even before he said it, she knew. Her father's deals always ended the same way, with someone else paying the price. "What did you do?" "Saved the family." He looked up at her with bloodshot eyes that held equal parts shame and desperate hope. "Offered them you. Marriage contract. You'll wed the Alpha King, and the debt disappears. Clean slate. Family saved." The document slipped from Eowyn's numb fingers. 3 years. She'd spent 3 years working in secret, using false names and intermediaries, investing what little money she could scrape together, building a network of business contacts who didn't know they were dealing with Lord Vane's daughter. She'd been 6 months away from earning enough to clear the debt legitimately. 6 months from freedom. The king agreed to this? Her voice sounded distant, not quite her own. "Well," Lord Vane shifted uncomfortably. "Had to make the offer appealing. Told them you were hideously scarred from the fire, simple-minded from the trauma, that you'd been hidden away because no decent family would take you. But you'd make an obedient queen. No trouble. No demands." He tried for a smile. "They took the deal immediately. Wedding in 2 weeks. You'll be a queen, Eowyn. You should be grateful." "Grateful?" The word tasted like ash. "You sold me as damaged goods to save yourself from prison. To save the family. Your sisters. Your brother. They'd all suffer if I went to debtor's prison. This way, everyone wins. You get a crown. I get freedom. The king gets a queen who won't cause problems." Lord Vane leaned forward, suddenly focused despite the alcohol. You've been hiding anyway, girl. Playing at being the tragic scarred victim for years. Now you'll just do it in a palace. What's the difference?" "Everything," Eowyn thought. The difference was everything. She'd been hiding, yes, but strategically. She'd learned at 8 years old, watching her mother burn, that being noticed was dangerous. Being beautiful and intelligent made you a target in a world full of predators. So she'd cultivated obscurity, let the scar rumors grow wild, played the damaged recluse while secretly building the skills and connections that would save her family. On her terms, in her time. Now her father had sold her off like a lame horse, branding her as defective to make the deal sweeter. But as Eowyn stared at her father's pathetic, self-satisfied face, a different kind of calculation began. Yes, this marriage ruined her careful plans. Yes, being shackled to a king she'd never met was a nightmare. But there was an angle here, a possibility. As queen, she'd have power. Real power, not the scraps she'd been gathering through intermediaries and false identities. She'd have resources, influence, access to information and leverage that could save her family properly. Not just clear their debts, but secure their future so her father could never gamble it away again. She just had to survive the marriage first. "Tell me about the king," Eowyn said carefully. "What did the treasurer say about him?" Lord Vane waved dismissively. "Cold, practical. Hasn't taken a queen because he thinks emotions weaken rulers. Perfect match for you. He wants a political marriage with no messy feelings involved. You'll perform your duties, produce an heir eventually, and otherwise stay out of his way. Easy arrangement. Easy." Nothing about this was easy. But Eowyn had learned to survive impossible situations. And this King Lysander, who thought he was getting a simple-minded, grateful bride, he had no idea what was actually coming. "The scars," she said slowly. "Made you sound like a monster." They barely haggled on the debt terms, probably felt sorry for me, having to keep a creature like that hidden. Lord Vane actually laughed. Worked perfectly. Eowyn touched her face, feeling the delicate ridges where fire had kissed her skin when she was 8. The scars weren't disfiguring, they never had been. They traced elegant patterns across her left cheekbone, down her neck, across her collarbone like lacework. Her mother's ladies had called them beautiful once, before the Vane family fell and everyone learned it was safer to call them monstrous instead. She'd spent years letting people believe the scars made her ugly, because ugly meant invisible, and invisible meant safe. Now her father had weaponized those lies, turned them into currency that bought his freedom. Fine, she could use that. I'll do it, Eowyn said, and watched relief flood her father's face. But I have conditions. Conditions? You're in no position. My sister's dowries will be set aside, untouchable. You'll sign over management of the remaining Vane estates to trustees, and you'll enter a treatment program for the drinking and gambling, or I'll make sure the king knows exactly how this debt was really accumulated. Eowyn leaned forward, letting her father see the steel beneath her carefully cultivated timidity. You sold me to save yourself, father. The least you can do is stop destroying what I'm trying to save. Lord Vane sputtered. But she'd learned years ago that her father was all bluster and no spine. He'd sign, and Eowyn would walk into this arranged marriage with a plan. Let the Alpha King think he was getting a scarred, simple bride. Let the court prepare for the spectacle of the monster queen. Eowyn would play her role perfectly. Timid, grateful, overwhelmed. While everyone watched the damaged girl fumbling through palace life, the real Eowyn would be working, gathering information, building alliances, securing her family's future. She'd been underestimated her entire life. It was her greatest weapon. Over the next 2 weeks, Eowyn prepared. She practiced her timid victim persona in the mirror, perfecting the downcast eyes and hesitant voice. She commissioned the heaviest, most concealing wedding veil she could find. Wanting the unveiling to be maximum shock, she sent careful instructions to her network of business contacts through her usual intermediaries, ensuring her secret work would continue even while she was trapped in a marriage. And late at night, alone in her chamber, she allowed herself exactly 10 minutes of grief for the life she'd never have. No marriage for love. No freedom to be herself. No escape from performing, hiding, surviving. But she'd been surviving since she was 8 years old. She'd survive this too. On the morning of the wedding, her youngest sister Clara helped her dress, tears streaming down the girl's face. I'm so sorry, Ellie. I'm so sorry father did this to you. Eowyn hugged her tight, breathing in the scent of her sister's rose perfume. It's all right. I'll make sure you're taken care of, all of you. But you're being married to a stranger, a king who thinks you're... Clara couldn't finish. A monster? Eowyn smiled, touching her scars. Let him think that. It's safer this way. Clara pulled back, searching her face. You're going to do something, aren't you? You have a plan. I always have a plan. Eowyn kissed her sister's forehead. Now help me with this veil. I need to look appropriately tragic for my debut as the scarred bride. As layer after layer of lace obscured her face, Eowyn took one last look at herself in the mirror. Silver white hair braided with winter roses, scars that caught the light like jewelry, storm gray eyes that had learned to see through lies. She looked beautiful, dangerous, entirely herself. Then the veil came down, and she became the character everyone expected. The damaged girl, the grateful victim, the ugly duckling bride. Walking down that cathedral aisle on her father's trembling arm, hearing the cruel whispers, feeling thousands of eyes on her concealed form, Eowyn's heart pounded with fear and fury and determination. King Lysander thought he was getting a safe, uncomplicated arrangement. The court anticipated a spectacle, a monster, a tragedy. They had no idea what was really standing at that altar. And when the veil finally lifted, and she met the Alpha King's shocked amber gaze, Eowyn allowed herself one small, calculated smile. The walk from the cathedral to the royal chambers felt like a death march, though the palace corridors were lined with servants bowing and courtiers whispering behind jeweled hands. Lysander's grip on Eowyn's arm was firm but not cruel, his face an unreadable mask as he guided her through the labyrinth of power she'd just married into. The wedding feast had been mercifully brief. The king had made their excuses almost immediately after the ceremony, claiming his bride was overwhelmed and needed rest. The court had accepted this with knowing smirks, assuming the poor, scarred creature couldn't handle the attention. If only they knew the truth. The moment the chamber doors closed behind them, Lysander released her arm and put 10 feet of distance between them. The room was magnificent, all dark wood and silver accents, Enormous windows overlooking the moonlit capital. A bed large enough for 6 people that somehow still felt too intimate. Elowen stood frozen near the door, her wedding gown suddenly feeling like a costume, her careful composure threatening to crack under the weight of his stare. "Explain." His voice was low, controlled, but she could hear the fury underneath. The scars, the rumors, the deception. "Explain all of it. Now." Elowen dropped her gaze, letting her shoulders curve inward, becoming smaller, timid, grateful. Exactly what he expected from a damaged bride saved from obscurity. "My father was ashamed of me, Your Majesty. After the fire that killed my mother, after I was marked," she touched her scarred cheek with trembling fingers. "He couldn't bear to look at me. He told people the scars were worse than they are, because it was easier than admitting he was hiding me away out of shame, rather than mercy. Look at me." She obeyed, meeting those amber eyes with her own storm-gray ones, and saw him searching for lies. She gave him truth, partial truth, the kind that satisfied without revealing. "I learned to stay hidden, to be quiet and unremarkable. It was safer that way. I never imagined," her voice broke perfectly, "I never imagined anyone would want to marry me, let alone a king. You've given my family everything. You've saved us from ruin. I'm grateful, Your Majesty. Truly. I'll be whatever kind of queen you need me to be." Lysander moved closer, his height and power suddenly overwhelming in the intimate space. "What I need," he said quietly, "is honesty. And what I'm seeing in your eyes isn't gratitude, Elowen. It's calculation." Her heart stuttered, but she held her ground. "I don't understand." "Yes, you do." He circled her slowly, a predator assessing prey. "You destroyed Lady Morgana at court today with surgical precision. Your father claimed you were simple-minded, but you speak like someone educated far beyond what a hidden daughter should be. And this," he gestured at her face, her body, "this is not the monster the kingdom was promised. So I'll ask you once more. What are you hiding?" Elowen let tears gather easy enough when fear was real. "I learned to defend myself with words because I couldn't defend myself any other way. My grandmother taught me before she died, said intelligence was the only weapon women like us had. But I'm not hiding anything else, Your Majesty. I'm just trying to survive, like I've always done." The silence stretched between them, taut as a blade. Finally, Lysander stepped back. "Our marriage is political. I need a queen for stability, for heirs eventually, for appearances. I don't need or want emotional complications. You'll perform your duties at court. You'll learn what's expected, and you'll stay out of my way otherwise. Do we understand each other?" "Yes, Your Majesty. And if I discover you've deceived me about anything else, anything, there will be consequences. I don't tolerate lies, Elowen. Not from enemies, not from allies, and certainly not from my wife." She nodded meekly, the perfect image of submission. Inside, her mind was already racing, cataloging exits, and analyzing his tells. He was angry, yes, but also attracted. She'd seen the way his eyes had tracked her during the ceremony, the way his jaw tightened when she stood close. That attraction could be useful, or dangerous, depending on how she played this. "You'll sleep there." Lysander gestured to an adjoining chamber. "I'm not a monster. I won't force you into anything you're not ready for." The irony of being called not a monster while he dictated the terms of her captivity wasn't lost on Elowen, but she simply curtsied. "Thank you for your mercy, Your Majesty." He left through another door without another word, and Elowen finally allowed herself to breathe. Hours later, alone in her chamber, she stood before the full-length mirror and slowly removed the modest nightgown the palace servants had provided. The scars revealed themselves inch by inch, delicate silver patterns that traced from her left cheekbone down her neck, across her collarbone, spreading like frost across her shoulder and upper arm. The fire had kissed her, marked her, transformed her. Her mother had died pushing her to safety, and these scars were the price of survival. She used to hate them. Now she understood they were armor, visible proof of damage that made people underestimate her, dismiss her, look past her to find threats elsewhere. Everyone saw the scars and assumed weakness. No one looked for the strength beneath. Elowen touched the mirror, meeting her own eyes. "Survive this," she whispered. "Save your family. Trust no one. Not even him. Especially not him." Outside her window, the capital slept under stars that had watched the rise and fall of kingdoms. Tomorrow she'd wake as a queen, expected to smile and bow and play her part in Lysander's cold political arrangement. But tonight, she was still herself, still the girl who'd learned to turn survival into an art form. And the Alpha King, who thought he'd married a grateful, simple bride, had no idea what he'd actually brought into his palace. The throne room was a masterpiece of intimidation, vaulted ceilings that swallowed sound, walls lined with the mounted heads of enemies defeated centuries ago, and a sea of nobility dressed in silks and jewels that cost more than most families earned in lifetimes. Elowyn stood beside Lysander's throne, acutely aware that every eye in the room was dissecting her like a specimen under glass. Her gown was modest by court standards, pale silver that made her hair shine and her scars visible, and she kept her expression carefully neutral as Lysander conducted the morning's business with brutal efficiency. The whispers started the moment there was a break in petitions. Noble ladies clustered in groups, their fans fluttering like predatory wings, their voices just loud enough to carry. Look at her standing there like she belongs. Did you see the king's face during the ceremony? Pure shock. My cousin said Lord Vane was falling down drunk when he made the deal. Sold his daughter like livestock. Elowyn breathed through it, maintaining her timid bride composure. She'd expected this, had prepared for it, but knowing you'd be thrown to wolves and actually facing the pack were different things entirely. Then Lady Morgana approached. Tall, dark-haired, beautiful in the way of women who'd weaponized their looks from birth. The Duchess had positioned herself as Lysander's most likely queen for the past 2 years. Her smile was poison wrapped in honey as she executed a curtsy so shallow it bordered on insulting. Your Majesty. Morgana's voice carried across the suddenly quiet room. How wonderful to finally meet you. We've all been so curious about Lord Vane's hidden daughter. Tell me, did your poor, scarred family manage to scrape together a proper dowry? Or was clearing their debt sufficient payment for such an advantageous match? The court held its breath. Elowyn felt Lysander's attention snap toward her like a physical force, waiting to see how she'd handle this first real test. She could play broken, retreat, let Morgana establish dominance. That would be safest. Expected. But something in the Duchess's smug expression, the certainty that Elowyn was easy prey, ignited a spark of fury that 3 years of careful hiding couldn't quite smother. Lady Morgana. Elowyn's voice was soft but clear, each word precisely placed. How kind of you to concern yourself with my family's finances. Though I must confess confusion, I was under the impression that a queen's value lay in her ability to lead, to inspire, to strengthen her kingdom through wisdom and compassion. But perhaps you're operating under different assumptions? That a queen's worth is measured purely in gold and advantageous bloodlines? She tilted her head, letting light catch her scars. If so, I understand your distress. After all, by those standards, even the wealthiest, most well-connected lady might find herself insufficient for the role. The silence was absolute. Morgana's face went white, then red. How dare you? I dare, Elowyn continued, her tone still gentle, because His Majesty chose me, not for my family's wealth or status. We have neither. Not because I was the safest political choice, clearly I wasn't, but perhaps because he saw something in me worth more than calculated social climbing and thinly veiled ambition, though I'm simply a debt bride, as you so eloquently put it. So what would I know about what kings value in their queens? The verbal evisceration was so elegantly delivered, so perfectly wrapped in false modesty, that it took the court a moment to realize what they'd just witnessed. Then the whispers exploded. Several younger nobles fought to hide smiles. An older duchess actually laughed. And Morgana, her social superiority shredded in 30 seconds, could only spin on her heel and retreat. Elowyn immediately dropped her gaze. Her hands trembling, though whether from adrenaline or fear of what she'd just revealed, she couldn't say. She'd lost control, shown her teeth, exactly what she'd sworn not to do. When Lysander finally dismissed the court hours later, his hand on her elbow was firm as he guided her not to her chambers but to his private study. The moment the door closed, he turned on her with an expression she couldn't read. You're not what your father claimed. You're not what you're pretending to be. His voice was dangerously quiet. Tell me the truth, Elowyn. Who are you really? She could lie. Should lie. But he'd already seen too much, and more deception would only make things worse. I learned to seem harmless to survive, she said, meeting his eyes. You don't understand what it's like for women in dangerous places, Your Majesty. Being underestimated is armor. Being dismissed as weak or simple or damaged means predators look elsewhere for prey. I've been surviving in a court of vipers since I was 8 years old, just a different court than this one. Lysander studied her for a long moment. That was truth, partial truth, but still deception by omission. He stepped closer. What else are you hiding? What game are you playing? No game, just survival. And that, at least, was entirely honest. I'm trying to protect my family and stay alive in a world that wants to destroy women like me. That's all. I swear it. He didn't look convinced, but something in his expression shifted recognition. Maybe, or respect. Women like you, he repeated softly. You mean women who are smarter than they pretend to be, more dangerous than they appear? Elowen said nothing, but her silence was answer enough. Lysander's smile was sharp. Then stop pretending with me. I don't need a timid bride. I need a queen who can handle vipers like Morgana without breaking. Be that, Elowen. Be honest about what you are, and if what I am isn't what you want, then we'll deal with that when it happens. He moved toward the door, then paused. That takedown was impressive, by the way. Morgana's been insufferable for years. Watching you dismantle her with perfect courtesy was almost worth the chaos it's going to cause. After he left, Elowen sank into a chair, her careful composure finally cracking. She'd revealed too much, played her hand too early. But Lysander hadn't seemed angry, intrigued. Maybe. Suspicious. Definitely. But not angry. Perhaps honesty, carefully measured, was its own kind of weapon. The royal hunt was supposed to be a harmless tradition, nobles chasing deer through the king's forest, more social theater than actual hunting. Elowen had tried to decline, claiming inexperience with riding, but Lysander had insisted. The court needs to see their queen participating in royal customs, he'd said, his tone making it clear this wasn't optional. So she'd mounted the gentle mare the stable master provided, wearing a riding habit in deep green that made her silver hair gleam, and followed the hunting party into the autumn woods with dread coiling in her stomach. She'd been right to be afraid. The mare had been calm for the first hour, following the group at an easy pace while nobles laughed and servants poured wine. Then something spooked her, a sudden movement, a sharp sound, and the horse bolted. Elowen grabbed for the reins, but they slipped through her gloved fingers as the mare charged forward in blind panic, crashing through underbrush toward a section of forest she didn't recognize. Branches whipped at her face. The world became a blur of green and brown and terror. Then she saw the cliff edge rushing toward them, a sheer drop that ended in jagged rocks 50 feet below. Elowen threw herself sideways, trying to dismount, but the saddle shifted wrong and suddenly she was falling, the mare screaming as it tried to stop, hooves skidding on loose earth. The cliff edge crumbled beneath them. She felt gravity take hold, felt the sick lurch of open air. Strong arms caught her mid-fall, yanking her backward with inhuman strength. Lysander. He'd shifted partially, his eyes blazing gold, his reflexes far beyond human as he hauled her away from the edge. The mare wasn't so lucky, its momentum carried it over, and Elowen heard its final terrified whinny cut short by sickening impact. For a moment, she could only shake in Lysander's arms, her breath coming in ragged gasps, the reality of almost death slowly sinking in. He held her tightly, his heart pounding against her back, and she realized he was shaking too with fear or fury. She couldn't tell. "The saddle," someone shouted. One of the royal guards was examining the fallen tack, his face grim. "Your Majesty, you need to see this." Lysander set Elowen down carefully, keeping one hand on her arm as they approached. The guard held up leather straps that should have secured the saddle. They'd been cut not cleanly, but strategically, designed to hold just long enough before failing under stress. "This wasn't an accident," Lysander said, his voice deadly quiet. "Someone tried to kill you." The hunting party erupted in shocked whispers, but Elowen barely heard them. Her mind was racing, calculating, and she realized with sinking certainty that she knew why this had happened. She'd been so careful, so cautious about her investigation. But someone had noticed. Someone knew. Back at the palace, in Lysander's private study with guards posted outside, he cleaned the scratches on her face with surprising gentleness while his questions came sharp and relentless. "Who wants you dead, Elowen? What aren't you telling me?" She'd planned to reveal this information slowly, carefully, once she'd secured her position, but nearly dying had stripped away her caution. "I have enemies," she said quietly, "from before the marriage, before my father's debts became impossible." Lysander's hands stilled. "Explain." The Vane family businesses didn't just fail through bad luck and gambling. Someone was sabotaging us systematically, deliberately, for years. Deals fell through at the last moment. Shipments disappeared. Partners suddenly backed out of contracts. Elowen met his eyes. "My father was too drunk to notice, but I did. So I started investigating, using false names, intermediaries, buying information. I discovered evidence of a conspiracy. Someone in your court has been deliberately destroying noble families, bankrupting them, then profiting when their assets are sold at auction." Lysander went very still. You've been running your own investigation, while pretending to be a helpless, hidden daughter. For how long? 3 years, since I was 17. She watched his face for signs of anger, but saw only intense focus. I was going to expose them once I had power as queen. Once I had protection, but if they know I'm investigating, they'll try to eliminate you before you can reveal anything. Lysander's jaw tightened. Show me everything you have. For the next 2 hours, they worked together in his study. Elowen producing documents she'd hidden in her chambers, coded records, copies of suspicious transactions, names of nobles whose financial ruin followed suspicious patterns. Lysander absorbed information with frightening speed, his mind clearly as sharp as hers, asking questions that cut straight to the heart of complex financial maneuvers. The intellectual connection was undeniable. He wasn't just tolerating her intelligence, he was engaging with it, challenging her conclusions, building on her theories. Here, Elowen pointed to a series of transactions. These 3 families all ruined within 6 months of each other. All had rejected marriage alliances with Lord Castellan. Lysander finished, his voice cold with recognition. My most trusted advisor. Their eyes met, and Elowen saw her own shock reflected back. If the conspiracy reached that high, they were in more danger than she'd realized. Lysander reached out, his fingers brushing her scarred cheek where he'd cleaned the scratches. The touch was gentle, intimate, in a way that had nothing to do with tending wounds. You should have told me immediately. We could have worked together from the start. I didn't trust you. The honesty slipped out before she could stop it. I didn't trust anyone. And now? Elowen's breath caught. She was in dangerous territory, she realized. Not just physically someone wanted her dead, but emotionally. Lysander was looking at her like she mattered. Like she was valuable not despite her secrets, but because of her strength. And she was starting to believe it. Now, she whispered. I think I'm starting to. His thumb traced her jawline. And when he leaned closer, she didn't pull away. The scream tore through the night like a blade through silk, and Lysander was moving before he was fully awake. He found Elowen on the balcony they shared between their chambers, her nightgown whipping in the cold wind, her entire body shaking with sobs she was trying desperately to muffle. She didn't hear him approach, lost in whatever horror had dragged her from sleep, and when he touched her shoulder she flinched so violently she nearly fell. It's me, he said quietly, catching her. You're safe. It was a dream. It wasn't a dream. Her voice was raw, broken in a way he'd never heard before. All her careful composure, all her practiced masks gone, leaving only grief so deep it made his chest ache. It was a memory. It's always a memory. Lysander guided her to the stone bench, wrapping his cloak around her trembling shoulders. The capital spread below them, peaceful under starlight, but Elowen stared at nothing with eyes that saw something else entirely. Something terrible. The fire, she whispered finally. Everyone thinks it was an accident. Kitchen mishap, tragedy, unfortunate fate. But my mother, she'd discovered something. Financial records that didn't match. Money disappearing from the royal treasury. Your father's court. She looked at him then, and her eyes were haunted. She was going to report it, and 3 days later, our house burned. Lysander felt ice settle in his stomach. His father had been many things, most of them cruel, but he'd never suspected. You think it was deliberate? I know it was. I was 8 years old, and I heard men's voices before the smoke started. I tried to wake my mother, tried to get her to the window, but the flames were everywhere, and I was so small, and she pushed me. Elowen's voice broke. She pushed me toward the servants' exit, and went back for my father and siblings. The ceiling collapsed. I heard her screaming, and I couldn't help her. Her whole body was shaking now, years of buried trauma forcing its way to the surface. Lysander pulled her close without thinking, letting her sob against his chest while rage and sympathy warred in his mind. She'd been 8, a child, and she'd survived arson meant to silence her mother's investigation. The scars, he said quietly. That's when burning timber fell on me. The pain I can't describe it, but I crawled out anyway. Crawled through fire because dying meant they won. Elowen pulled back enough to meet his eyes. My father never investigated. He was too broken, too traumatized. He turned to drink and gambling to forget what happened. And I was 8 years old, scarred, orphaned of my mother, watching my father destroy himself. I learned very quickly that asking questions got you killed. That being noticed, being remarkable, being someone people paid attention to, it was dangerous. So you made yourself invisible. I made myself beneath notice, Let the scars be all anyone saw. Let them think I was damaged, broken, simple-minded. Let them pity me or mock me, as long as they dismissed me. She touched her face, fingers tracing the silvered patterns. Everyone sees the scars and thinks I'm weak. No one looks for the person underneath. The scars became my armor, my disguise, my survival. Lysander studied her in the moonlight, this woman who'd been forged in fire at 8 years old, who'd turned trauma into strategy, who'd spent a decade hiding brilliance behind carefully cultivated obscurity. You've been fighting alone since you were a child. Fighting alone is safer. Trusting people gets them killed. Her voice was hollow. My mother trusted the wrong person with her discovery. I won't make that mistake. Elowen. He took her scarred hand in both of his, feeling the ridged tissue, the evidence of survival. My father was a tyrant. Vicious, unpredictable, violent. I watched him break my mother's spirit over years of calculated cruelty. Watched him execute advisors for minor failures. Watched him rule through fear. And I learned very young that showing emotion meant giving him weapons to hurt you with. She went still, listening. So I became cold, perfect, unshakable. The prince who never flinched, never wept, never showed weakness. Everyone thinks I'm carved from ice because that's what I needed them to think. Lysander met her storm-gray eyes. We're both wearing armor, Elowen. You hide behind scars and strategic weakness. I hide behind coldness and calculated strength. But maybe... He hesitated, then committed. Maybe we could try taking it off. Together. Maybe we could risk being real with each other, since we're the only ones who understand what it costs to build these defenses. Elowen's breath hitched. What if being real gets us hurt? Then we hurt together. But at least we won't be alone anymore. For a long moment, she just looked at him, this cold king who'd shown her gentleness, this powerful alpha who'd revealed his own scars. Then, slowly, she leaned forward and rested her forehead against his, her scarred hand still held in his. I'm scared, she whispered. I haven't trusted anyone since I was 8 years old. I don't know how. Neither do I. Lysander's thumb traced circles on her palm. We'll figure it out together, one truth at a time. They sat like that as dawn broke over the capital, two people who'd spent their lives hiding finally daring to be seen. It wasn't love yet, too soon, too fragile for that word. But it was honest, real, the first foundation stone of something that might, eventually, become unshakable. The war room had become their sanctuary over the past 3 weeks, maps spread across the table, financial records stacked in careful piles, conspiracy threads literally pinned to the walls with red string connecting suspects. Elowen stood studying the pattern, her silver hair caught up in a messy knot, ink staining her fingers from hours of documentation. Lysander watched her from across the table, pretending to review guard reports while actually cataloging the way lamplight caught her scars, the fierce intelligence blazing in her eyes as she solved puzzles his warriors couldn't touch. Here, she said, tapping a cluster of pins. Lord Castellan's cousin controls the shipping guild. His brother-in-law runs the largest auction house, and his nephew. She traced a line. Just got appointed to the Treasury Oversight Committee. It's not just embezzlement, Lysander. He's building a network to control every financial avenue in the kingdom, which means he's not just stealing. He's positioning for something bigger. Lysander moved beside her, studying her work. A coup? Or leverage? Enough power to make even a king beholden to him. Elowen glanced up, and their faces were suddenly close, the air between them charged. Tomorrow's court session, if we expose his nephew's appointment as nepotism, force an investigation into his qualifications, we can start unraveling the network without showing our full hand. Castellan will push back, publicly. Let him. I'll handle it. Her smile was sharp, dangerous. He still thinks I'm the timid debt bride. He has no idea what's coming. The court session the next morning was brutal theater. Lord Castellan, tall and silver-haired with a politician's practiced warmth, presented his nephew for the treasury position, with flowery speeches about family honor and capable leadership. Elowen sat beside Lysander's throne, the picture of docile queenship, while internally counting down the moments. When Castellan finished, Lysander spoke with perfect calm. The queen has questions about this appointment. Every head turned. Elowen rose gracefully, her voice gentle but carrying. Lord Castellan, your nephew is certainly from an estimable family. But I'm curious, what financial training does he possess? What institutions did he study at? What previous positions qualify him for oversight of the kingdom's treasury? Castellan's smile tightened. Your Majesty, surely family reputation is important, Eowyn agreed sweetly. As is competence. His Majesty and I have been reviewing the Treasury Committee's requirements, and we believe transparency in appointments strengthens the kingdom. So perhaps you could share your nephew's credentials? For the court's confidence? It was a trap perfectly laid. Castellan sputtered. His nephew went red, and when neither could produce satisfactory answers, Lysander smoothly suggested an independent review of all recent Treasury appointments. The court murmured approval. The new queen demanding accountability felt refreshingly honest. Castellan left the throne room with fury barely concealed behind his diplomatic mask. That was perfect, Lysander said later, guiding Eowyn back to their chambers with his hand warm on her lower back. You played him exactly right. Gentle enough not to seem threatening, pointed enough to draw blood. We played him. Eowyn's heart was racing, but not from the political victory. They'd moved as one mind during that session, anticipating each other's moves, building on each other's strengths. Partnership felt intoxicating, dangerous. You set the stage, Lysander spun her against the wall the moment their chamber door closed, his amber eyes blazing with something that had nothing to do with politics. You were magnificent. You are magnificent. Every day I discover another layer, another strength I didn't know you possessed, and he kissed her. Not the chaste, dutiful kiss of their wedding ceremony, but real want, hungry and desperate and honest. Eowyn gasped against his mouth, her carefully constructed walls crumbling as weeks of tension and denied attraction exploded between them. Her hands fisted in his shirt, his fingers tangled in her silver hair, and when they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, the truth hung between them like a confession. I don't want a political marriage anymore, Lysander said roughly. I want you. This. Real. Then take me. Eowyn pulled him toward the bed, her voice shaking. No more pretending. No more armor. Just us. They came together with the desperate intensity of two people who'd spent too long hiding, both finally surrendering to something neither could control. Lysander traced her scars with reverent fingers, whispering that she was beautiful, extraordinary, his. Eowyn let herself be vulnerable in ways she'd sworn she never would, trusting him with her body, her pleasure, her truth. And when it was over, lying tangled in silk sheets with dawn approaching, the words spilled out before she could stop them. I'm falling in love with you. Her voice was terrified. I didn't mean to. I swore I wouldn't, but I am. And it's terrifying because loving you means you can destroy me. Lysander pulled her closer, his hand cradling her scarred cheek. I've been half in love with you since the unveiling, since you stood at that altar with defiance in your eyes, and I realized everything I thought I knew was wrong. He kissed her forehead. You're not the queen I thought I was getting, Eowyn. You're the queen I actually needed, the one who challenges me, matches me, makes me want to be better than the cold king I'd resigned myself to being. What if we ruin each other? Then we'll be ruined together. But I don't think we will. His smile was soft, genuine. I think we might actually save each other. For the first time since she was 8 years old, Eowyn let herself believe she might be safe. Not because she was hidden or dismissed or beneath notice, but because she was seen fully, honestly seen and chosen anyway. The state dinner was supposed to be a celebration, a treaty signed with the Eastern Territories, peace secured, prosperity ahead. The great hall glittered with candles and nobility dressed in their finest, wine flowing freely as course after course emerged from the kitchens. Eowyn sat beside Lysander at the head table, his hand occasionally finding hers beneath the tablecloth, their newfound intimacy a secret warmth between them. She'd never felt safer, never felt more hopeful that perhaps she could have both love and survival, partnership and truth. Then her father stood up. Lord Vane was already drunk, his face flushed and his words slurring as he raised his goblet toward the head table. Eowyn's blood turned to ice. No, not now, not here. A toast, her father called, and the hall quieted. To my brilliant daughter, the queen. Everyone thought she was just a scarred, simple girl I was lucky to marry off. But she fooled you all. He laughed, delighted with himself. The scarred monster rumors? Her own creation. Genius, really. Made her invisible while she ran business deals under false names, invested our money, saved the family fortune well, almost saved it. He swayed dangerously. She's been manipulating this entire court since the wedding, playing the timid bride while scheming behind everyone's backs. That's my clever girl. The silence that followed was deafening. Eowyn couldn't breathe, couldn't move. The hall erupted in shocked whispers that grew to shouts. Lysander's hand had gone rigid in hers, then pulled away completely. She tried to catch his eye, tried to make him understand. But he was staring straight ahead with an expression she recognized too well. The cold king. Walls rebuilt, armor back in place. "Fraud!" someone shouted. Lady Morgana rose from her seat, her face alight with vindictive triumph. She lied to get the crown. False identity, false pretenses, what else has she lied about? Perhaps she enchanted his majesty, clouded his judgment with whatever tricks she learned in her secret dealings. The accusations multiplied. Nobles demanded annulment. Some called for investigation, others for immediate arrest. The carefully constructed world Elowyn had built over 3 weeks of partnership and growing trust collapsed in minutes, crushed under her father's drunken pride and the court's eager cruelty. Lysander stood, his voice cutting through the chaos with alpha command. "This dinner is concluded. Court will reconvene tomorrow to address these allegations." He looked at Elowyn once, and his eyes were empty of everything she'd seen there this morning. The warmth, the trust, the love. "My chambers. Now." The walk through the palace corridors felt like a death march. Nobles pressed against the walls as they passed, whispering, staring, judging. Elowyn's mind raced through explanations, justifications, ways to make him understand. But when they reached their chambers, and Lysander finally faced her, she saw something worse than anger. She saw betrayal. "The false identities," he said, voice deadly quiet. "The secret business dealings. How much of it, Elowyn? How much were you hiding?" "I was going to tell you." "When? After another week? Another month? After I'd fallen completely in love with you and was too compromised to care about the deception?" His hands were shaking. "I told you about my father, about learning to survive by hiding emotion. I gave you my truth, my vulnerability. And you, I gave you truth too. Everything I told you was real." "Partial truth." Lysander's control finally cracked. "Calculated honesty designed to make me trust you while you kept running schemes I knew nothing about. The investigation into Castellan, was that even real? Or another manipulation to gain my confidence?" "It's real. Everything about the conspiracy is real." Elowyn stepped toward him, desperate. "Yes, I used false identities to conduct business. Yes, I cultivated the scar rumors deliberately. But I was surviving, Lysander. I was protecting my family the only way I knew how. And when I started trusting you, when I started falling in love with you, I stopped hiding." "Did you?" His laugh was bitter. "Because it seems like you were still keeping secrets, still running your own agenda. I let you in, Elowyn. I thought we were being honest, building something real, but you've been playing games this entire time." "It wasn't games, it was survival that became something real, something I didn't plan for. I can't believe you anymore." The words hit like physical blows. "Every time you tell me something, I'll wonder what else you're hiding. Every truth will feel like another calculated revelation. You've destroyed any foundation we might have built." He moved toward the door, and panic seized Elowyn's chest. Please, Lysander, don't leave. Let me explain everything. I need time." He wouldn't look at her. "The court will demand answers tomorrow. You should prepare whatever defense you can, though I honestly don't know if there's anything you could say that I'd believe anymore." The door closed behind him with terrible finality. Elowyn stood alone in their chambers, no longer their chambers, just hers, surrounded by evidence of the intimacy they'd built. His shirt draped over a chair, her hairpins scattered on his desk, the bed where they'd finally surrendered to each other just hours ago. All of it mocking her now. She sank to the floor, her carefully constructed composure finally shattering completely. Her father had destroyed everything trying to praise her. The court wanted her blood, and Lysander thought she'd manipulated him, used his vulnerability, played him for a fool. Maybe she had. Maybe she'd been so used to surviving through deception that she hadn't known how to stop, even when it mattered most. Maybe she deserved this. Outside the window, the capital slept under indifferent stars. Tomorrow she'd face potential execution for fraud. But tonight, alone in the dark, Elowyn mourned something more important than her life. She'd finally found someone who made her feel safe being herself, and she'd lost him. The emergency council meeting convened at dawn, the throne room packed with nobles who'd barely slept, their faces alight with scandal hunger and political calculation. Elowyn stood in the center of the chamber like a prisoner awaiting judgment, no longer seated beside Lysander's throne but isolated, vulnerable, too accused. She'd spent the night preparing not a defense for herself, but one final gambit. If she was going down, she'd take the real enemy with her. Lord Castellan stood near the throne, his expression appropriately grave as he addressed the assembled court. "Your Majesty, the evidence is clear. The Queen has admitted to using false identities, conducting secret business dealings, and deliberately deceiving this court about her background and capabilities. Such fraud cannot stand. For the stability of the kingdom, for the integrity of the crown, I move that she be arrested pending formal investigation and annulment proceedings." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the nobles. Lady Morgana smiled like a cat with cream. Lysander sat rigid on his throne, his face the cold mask Eowyn had first seen at their wedding. He hadn't looked at her once since entering the chamber. "The law is clear on fraudulent contracts," Castellan continued smoothly. "If the Queen obtained her position through deliberate deception, I have evidence." Eowyn's voice cut through the chamber, steady despite her terror. "Evidence of the real fraud in this court. Evidence of conspiracy, embezzlement, and murder that reaches the highest levels of His Majesty's government." Castellan's expression flickered just for a second, but she saw it. "Fear, Your Majesty. This is clearly a desperate attempt to deflect. Let her speak." Lysander's voice was cold, but he'd finally looked at her. If she has evidence of conspiracy, the court should hear it. Eowyn stepped forward, pulling documents from the leather case she'd carried. Her hands were steady now, muscle memory from years of secret dealings taking over. "Lord Castellan, you've been embezzling from the royal treasury for 8 years. You've systematically destroyed noble families who discovered irregularities in court finances, then purchased their assets through shell companies at bankruptcy auctions." She held up detailed ledgers. "Here are the records, cross-referenced with auction house sales and shipping manifests. Your network of relatives controls every step from creating the financial crisis to profiting from the collapse." The court erupted. Castellan's face went white, then red. "These are forgeries, fabrications by a proven liar. These documents came from your own offices, copied by clerks who were concerned about irregularities but too afraid to come forward." Eowyn looked directly at him, and her voice was steel. "The Vane family was one of your targets. You sabotaged our businesses for 3 years, drove my father to gambling and drink trying to save us, then manipulated him into that drunken confession last night to discredit me before I could expose you. Ridiculous. And 15 years ago, my mother discovered evidence of your embezzlement. She was going to report it to the king." Eowyn's voice cracked slightly, but she pushed through. 3 days later, our house burned. Arson, made to look like an accident. My mother died. An 8-year-old me learned that asking questions got people killed. She pulled out the final document, scorched but readable, recovered from her mother's belongings and hidden for years. A letter detailing treasury discrepancies, addressed to the late king, never delivered. This is what she died for. This is what you've been covering up for 15 years. The silence was absolute. Every eye moved between Eowyn and Castellan, who looked like a cornered animal. Lysander had gone perfectly still on his throne, amber eyes blazing. "You've been behind everything?" Lysander said quietly, pieces clicking into place. "The assassination attempt during the hunt. The court factions turning against her. Even Lord Vane's timing last night. I gave him extra wine and a little encouragement." Castellan's mask had shattered completely. "You were weak, Lysander, besotted with a fraud queen, letting emotions cloud your judgment. The kingdom needed stronger leadership." "My leadership," he signaled, and guards Eowyn didn't recognize moved forward with weapons drawn. Castellan's personal men, not loyal to the crown. The court screamed and scrambled backward. Lysander rose from his throne, beginning to shift, but one guard was already lunging. Eowyn threw herself between the blade and Lysander without thinking. The sword pierced her side, agony exploding through her body. She heard Lysander roar her name as she fell, felt his arms catch her. Then the world became chaos and violence, Lysander shifting partially, his beast erupting with fury she'd never seen, tearing through attackers with claws and fangs while still cradling her against his chest. Royal guards flooded in, overpowering Castellan's men. Blood pooled on marble floors. Eowyn's vision was graying, but she could hear Lysander's voice breaking as he pressed his hands against her wound. No, stay with me, Eowyn, please." "Had to protect you," she whispered. "Evidence in my chambers. Everything documented. Save the kingdom." "Damn the kingdom!" His face swam above her, streaked with tears and blood. "I need you. I was hurt and angry and stupid, but I never stopped loving you. Please don't leave me. Please." She wanted to tell him she loved him too, wanted to explain that every lie had been armor against a world that killed honest women, wanted one more chance to be real with him, but darkness was pulling her under, gentle and inevitable. The last thing she heard was Lysander screaming for healers, his voice raw with desperate grief. Pain dragged Elowen back to consciousness, sharp and immediate in her side, duller everywhere else. The healing chambers came into focus slowly. White walls, the smell of medicinal herbs, late afternoon sunlight streaming through windows, and Lysander, slumped in a chair beside her bed, his hand wrapped around hers, his face haggard with exhaustion and 3 days' worth of stubble he hadn't left. Even now, he was whispering something, prayers or promises. She couldn't tell which. "Lysander," she managed, her voice barely audible. His head snapped up, amber eyes going wide with desperate relief. "Elowen. Gods, Elowen." His composure shattered completely. He pressed his forehead to their joined hands, his shoulders shaking. "I thought I'd lost you." The healers said it was close, that if the blade had been an inch deeper, "I'm alive." She squeezed his hand weakly. "Stubborn, like you said." "I'm sorry." The words broke from him like a dam bursting. "I'm so sorry. You tried to explain and I wouldn't listen. I was hurt and angry, and I couldn't see past my own wounded pride to understand the truth you've been fighting alone your entire life, because trusting anyone got your mother killed. You weren't manipulating me, Elowen. You were surviving the only way you knew how. And when you finally started trusting me, started being honest, I threw it back in your face." Tears were streaming down her cheeks now. Everything she'd been holding back for days, for years, finally breaking free. "I should have told you everything from the start. The false identities, the business dealings, all of it. But I was so used to hiding, to keeping secrets as armor, that I didn't know how to stop. Even when I wanted to. Even when it mattered most. Tell me now." Lysander moved to sit on the edge of her bed, both hands cradling hers. "Tell me everything. Every secret, every scheme, every identity you've used. I want to know all of it. The real you. Not the version you thought I needed." So she did. For the next hour, weak but determined, Elowen laid bare 15 years of survival strategies. Every false name she'd operated under: Sarah Moonwhisper, the merchant; Lyra Ashford, the investor; Elena Frost, the information broker. Every business deal she'd orchestrated to save her family. Every manipulation she'd deployed to stay beneath notice while building power in shadows. The network of contacts who didn't know they were working for a disgraced noble's daughter. The careful documentation of every conspiracy thread, kept hidden in coded journals even after her marriage. "I'm not the perfect queen," she whispered finally, exhausted. "I'm scarred inside and out. I've lied and schemed and hidden so much of myself for so long I'm not sure I remember how to be fully honest. But I want to try. For you. For us. If you'll still have me." Lysander lifted her scarred hand to his lips, kissing each silvered ridge with devastating tenderness. "I don't want a perfect queen. I want you, scars, schemes, strength, and all. The woman who threw herself in front of a sword for me. The woman who exposed a conspiracy that would have destroyed this kingdom. The woman who's been surviving impossible circumstances since she was 8 years old and somehow still found the courage to love me." His voice roughened with emotion. "You changed me, Elowen. Made me want to be more than the cold king I'd resigned myself to being. You're not just the queen I needed, you're the woman I choose. Every day, not because debt or duty demands it, but because I love you. Even knowing everything I've done, everything I am, especially knowing that." He smiled, genuine and warm. "Though next time you're running a secret investigation or operating under a false identity, maybe loop me in? We're better together than apart. Partners? Always." They spoke new vows then, private and honest in the healing chamber's afternoon light. No priests or witnesses, no court watching, just two people who'd learned the hard way that perfection was a lie and vulnerability was strength. They promised truth over image, partnership over performance, choosing each other every day, not because fate or debt demanded it, but because love, real, complicated, hard-won love made them better than they were alone. 3 weeks later, when Elowen had healed enough to stand before the court again, Lysander made his ruling on Lord Vane. Stripped of his title, forbidden from holding property or making financial decisions, but spared prison at his daughter's request on the condition he enter permanent supervision and treatment. The Vane family would be saved, but on Elowen's terms, through her work and strategic brilliance, never again endangered by her father's weakness. And Elowen was crowned again, not as the debt bride, the scarred victim, the ugly duckling, but as Queen Elowen, the life weaver who'd survived fire, the strategist who'd exposed treason, the woman who'd earned her crown through courage rather than circumstance. Years later, Queen Elowyn stood in the reformed parliament she'd fought to create, watching young women from common families take seats alongside nobles, a revolution she'd quietly orchestrated one reform at a time. Debtors' prisons had been abolished. Women could own businesses, sign contracts, participate in governance. The kingdom had transformed, and she'd been the steady hand guiding that transformation. A group of young women approached after the session, led by a girl with burn scars across her hands who looked at Elowyn with desperate hope. "Your Majesty, they say you rose from being the scarred, ugly duckling to the kingdom's most beloved queen. How? How did you survive being dismissed and underestimated and still become this?" Elowyn smiled, touching her own scars, the silver patterns she'd once hidden, but now wore openly. "I was never an ugly duckling. I was a survivor who learned to hide in plain sight, to make my scars into armor, to turn being underestimated into my greatest weapon. But you know what the real magic was? It wasn't when the world finally saw me." She looked across the chamber to where Lysander stood talking with advisors, and his amber eyes found hers immediately, softening with the love that had never dimmed. "It was when I finally let myself be seen by someone who mattered, someone who saw past the armor to the person underneath and chose me anyway." "But how do you find that person?" the girl asked. "You become yourself first. Fully, honestly yourself, scars and strength and everything in between. And then you find someone brave enough to do the same." Elowyn took the girl's scarred hands in hers. "Your scars aren't damaged, sweetheart. They're proof you survived. Proof you're stronger than what tried to destroy you. Don't hide them. Own them. They're part of your story, and your story matters." Lysander joined them then, his hand finding Elowyn's waist with easy intimacy. 20 years of marriage, and he still looked at her like she was the most fascinating thing in his kingdom. "Ready to go home, my queen?" "Always." She squeezed the young woman's hands once more. "Remember, you're not broken. You're becoming. And that's the most powerful thing you can be." Walking through the palace corridors they'd once navigated as wary strangers, now moving in perfect synchronization as partners who'd chosen each other every day for 2 decades. Elowyn thought about doors, the ones that closed her mother's death, her father's betrayal, Tobias's rejection, and the ones that opened Lysander's love, her own strength, the kingdom she'd helped build into something better. Her scars caught the evening light, no longer armor but simply part of her. And she was finally, completely, herself. If this story touched your heart, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever hidden parts of yourself to feel safe? Have you found people who let you be authentically, messily, beautifully yourself, scars and all? Share your story in the comments below. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Subscribe for more Alpha King romances where love is found through truth rather than perfection, where scars are celebrated as survival rather than shame, and where heroines are worthy not despite their damage but because of their strength. These are stories about vulnerability as courage, about imperfection as beauty, about doors that close so better ones can open. Your support helps create more stories for women who need to hear that they're not broken, they're becoming. That being seen is terrifying but worth it. That the right person will love them not for who they pretend to be, but for who they actually are. Because sometimes the greatest love stories aren't about finding perfection. They're about finding someone brave enough to see your truth and choose you anyway. Every single day.